afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for today's live PETA webinar. My name is Cassie Tung. I look after the marketing communications here at PETA, and I am really excited to be here this afternoon with all of you. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking to you today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, just a bit of quick housekeeping. Because we are recording this afternoon, we're just going to keep microphones and cameras off so we can focus on Anita and all the great things that she's going to have to say. But it is your webinar and your experience, so please do feel free to join in via the chat function. You can leave a question at any point during the webinar. You can leave one now if you've come in really prepared, and we will get to them as soon as we can, and I promise we'll get to as many as possible. So don't be shy, please do join in. We love to hear your comments. Now, let me introduce our amazing guest today. Anita Collins is an award-winning educator, researcher, and writer in the field of brain development and music learning. I am reading off a sheet because I don't want to get this wrong. In 2014, she wrote one of the most viewed TED education films ever made, just no big deal. And you might recognize her from the ABC series, Don't Stop the Music. Her new book, The Music Advantage, How Learning Music Helps Your Child's Brain and Wellbeing, is out now. And it is such a fascinating read. I've been working through it and it's so interesting. And I'm so excited to talk to you about it. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to sort of meet you. And it's so nice to be able to communicate with you all. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Look, I've been sitting with this for over the weekend and having a good read. Just a little plug for you. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the research that you've been doing to bring the book together.
Yeah, so I am a music educator and I've worked in, I'm secondary trained, but with many music educators, the experience is you go, as soon as you get into a school, they go, hey, can you teach primary? So I've taught all the way through. And then I did 12 years as well of tertiary education, taking students through their music and their arts side of things. But then I ended up doing just about everything, you know, behaviour management, assessment, all those sorts of other things. And part of that was doing my PhD, which was in neuromusical research, which is, at the time, it was a newer area of research which uses music as a tool to understand how the brain learns and grows and changes, as well as going back the other way about understanding how music learning can enhance development, but also we're working it as an intervention. So I look at the research. I don't do the research because I'm not a neuroscientist or a psychologist, but I look at the research kind of with a lens of a teacher and go, okay, how do we, or should we, apply this in school? How does it connect? How do we put it in such a way that teachers can use it to help it with their understanding of learning, but also help their development as well? So yeah, that's the answer is I've been reading it since my PhD. I have a habit of picking up my phone first thing in the morning, and the only thing I go through is my research alerts, and I see what new research has come out that day. It's my happy place, and I will happily sit there and read that. And then I really enjoy figuring out how to translate it so that teachers can understand it without losing the detail and the authenticity and the grey parts that are research. It's very important to me to try and make sure that it maintains that integrity when it comes into the educational space.
Yeah, that sounds so fascinating. I would want to get up and read about that too. Sounds like a great way to start the day. I wanted to talk to you specifically about, you've got a couple of chapters in your book that talk about how learning music and things like clapping in time can really inform English and literacy development. And our amazing member base here, they are all educators and school leaders who are really interested in best practice English and literacy teaching. And I was wondering if you could talk about the findings that you've come across and that you've worked with in schools. In your book, you have some amazing examples of looking at the way that children do certain music activities and what that might say about their reading. I was wondering if you could talk about how these two things can be related in the classroom and what that means.
Yeah, It's honestly, while I love how we can improve our music teaching, it's actually the one that I find the most exciting. And just to explain to everyone with us today, my mum was a reading recovery teacher, and before that a remedial reading teacher. And so much of my experience of education started with the dissecting of reading when it went wrong. And she would come home and talk about all these things. And as it's funny, as I've gone through the research, I now go back to our conversations when she talked about the musical concepts that she was working with the kids to help them hear the sounds, to be able to read with sort of any kind of prosody in their speech and things like that. So some of my favorite research, and it's the most applicable research, because music learning, and that's not just listening to music, so learning music, is being used as a tool to understand how language development happens. And there's a couple of reasons why. The first is they found that language and music in the brain share an overlapping neural network. And even more to that, there's a theory that's quite extensive now of the idea that children are born with their music processing network active, meaning they hear their mother's voice, and we've seen this happen, they hear their mother's voice as if it's music. So it's processed by the brain as if it's music. It's processed by the brain for its very natural forms, which is rhythm and melody. And then from there, children use musical concepts to pull out the speech sounds. And so the very first thing they do is speech and noise around the sort of 1 year of age. And then they pull out their vowels and their consonants and their envelopes, and all the different things that come into speech are still musical at that age. And this kind of research made me look at toddlers and go, that's why it's all sing-songy and it's halfway between language and music, because that's what's happening inside their brain. And then as well as illuminating that, some of my favorite research is they looked at children between the age of 3 and 4, and they looked for those that could keep a beat and those who couldn't keep a beat. So literally just tapping on a drum. And they found that because they had this hunch that kids who could keep a beat seemed to progress on quite naturally into their reading. They didn't have any delay or any problems. They seemed to be doing quite fine. And yet kids who couldn't keep a beat, or they were called non-synchronizers, seemed to really struggle from the age of 5 onwards with their reading. They tended to be delayed. They tended to have a really hard time with it. And they wanted to know how these might be connected. And what they did find is that kids who could synchronize and keep a beat between 3 and 4 were neurologically ready. They had the connectivity required to then start reading at the age of 5. It's kind of like an outward diagnostic tool for if what's up here is ready for that next big cognitive leap. They also noticed the non-synchronizers really, really struggled because that connectivity wasn't there. Now, from a music educator's point of view, I'm excited because it means we've got a whole year between, say, 4 and 5 to identify the non-synchronizers and to work with them using music to keep a beat to get them ready to go to school. And from a non-musical point of view, I think I would be so excited if I was a kindy teacher, knowing my students were coming into my class cognitively ready to read. It also helps identify kids who are dyslexic before we get to the point of letter identification and seeing that they might be struggling with that. So there's all these wonderful bits of research that could kind of fill in some important gaps, but ultimately could help with the language learning process all the way through. I mean, I've got heaps of examples, but there's one. Is that a good start?
That's a great start. I was wondering if you could talk to us about, there's this excellent scene in your book where you're with a group of teachers and you're watching an exercise completed by a group of, I think it was Year 1 students.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk about that for our members.
So I work with lots of schools to put in music programs, and we don't just put a music program in just with 1 or 2 teachers. We educate the whole school. So the whole group of teachers enhance their music learning skills as well, and their music teaching skills, and it becomes a whole school program. And such a privilege to keep going back into their schools and seeing how they're developing. But these teachers had only just started on there. I taught them an exercise that was beat keeping in a little song that was from Ghana, and they were so excited. They sent me a video. I said, look what we've done. And I was very excited too. But then I stopped the video and watched it again, and I went, tell me about this kid, because I could see this kid was very slow. He couldn't keep the beat. He was watching very, very carefully, so using his visual cues incredibly well. He was slowed down on the beat, but he was trying really, really hard. And there were a couple of movements I went, oh, that's interesting. And then I said, is this kid having problems? He's sort of delayed a little bit in his reading, and he's struggling possibly with a little bit of his coordination for the nuance in sound. Does he mix up his B's and his D's? And I sort of listed a few things, and these teachers looked at me and went, oh my God, how did you know? And I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe through my music training and sort of watching the little nuances of how they keep beat, I can actually relate that to some of their other learning. So I kind of went down the line, did it with maybe 3 or 4 other students, about saying, oh, this student's struggling with their working memory. This one's struggling with their inhibitory control, which is affecting their language like this. And it was just an incredible experience of being able to see how powerful viewing our students through a musical lens could be for the rest of their learning, particularly their literacy learning at that age.
What is the next step after you've done sort of that diagnostic look at these students? You know, maybe they're having these problems. What then happens to put improvements in place? What would you?
Yeah. Oh, it's already happened. So I can share more of that story, because as soon as this happened, they went, oh, this could be great. So the next thing we did was I started having further conversations with the teachers about specific what were the literacy and learning difficulties they were having. And then I worked with them to say, okay, what you're looking for in beat is not just the keeping of, like the finding of the beat, which is kind of what we do at the start of a song, and then the maintaining of the beat. So actually keeping it going for more than maybe 4 or 6 beats. That is attention stamina. A lot of the kids with their reading, they were struggling not with the reading so much, but with their paying of attention, so maintaining attention. So with those particular kids, it's like, okay, we're going to do 8 beats today, and they've got to keep it in time. And the next day we're going to do 10, and the next day we're going to do 12. So we used beat keeping as a way of extending their attention. And then I got the teachers to watch when and how that transferred across into their sort of their literacy block. And what they do at this school is they do all of this music learning as a primer to the literacy block. And they talk to the kids about, we're priming your brain with beat and melody so that you can transfer that across into your reading. And it's a really great, the kids love it. It's like, I'm priming my brain right now. So that was one of them. Another one, we looked at the inhibitory control. He was struggling. He'd keep a beat, and then he'd get bored and he'd go like this. It's like, no, keeping a beat. And that's what he was doing in his reading. I used to watch him with his book, and he'd have his book in front of him, and he'd read 4 or 5 words, and then the book would start moving as well, and his head start moving and all sorts of things. Again, an attention issue, but the basis of it was his inhibitory or impulse control. He just couldn't stop moving. So we worked on, again, sustaining that beat, but we get him to talk to his body to keep the beat all the way through his body. And by doing that, we think we helped him sort of synchronize all the way through his body rather than him feeling disconnected. And that's how it was translating into his reading. So it's almost like we took every child, we watched what they were doing with the beat, we looked at what they were doing in their literacy and language learning, and then we went, right, what's the intervention between the two? What do we need to focus on? So it became incredibly individualized, but in a classroom setting.
That is so interesting. That is, do you find that difficult to manage in a classroom setting to go that individualized?
No, because the wonderful thing about music is you do it all together. So you've got the kids concentrating like crazy, keeping a beat together, which is kind of like a team sport. It's something where the kids really want to do it very, very well. But we have knowledge of each child to look at them and go, okay, what are we working on with you in particular? And just a tiny little reminder, and it's just repetition. And a tiny little reminder every time they did beat keeping. So it actually, the teachers commented that it became easier. They couldn't believe you could individualize and yet do all the same thing at the same time. But they said it's become really easy to cater to every child's needs while doing something as a class, which, as a sidebar, created really, really strong social cohesion in the class and some really good, they started to see some fantastic helping behaviours, good sharing behaviours. The kids really thought about how they use their voice to speak to each other. So it had all these other sort of knock-on effects that the teachers started to notice as well.
It's incredible. Just that one little thing. Do you have, so it sounds like one of the best tips that you would give a teacher right now is to set up music and keeping a beat as a primer for the literacy block. Are there other tips like that that teachers could get off this webinar and plan to do tomorrow or next week in their classroom that might bring these two ideas together to improve both?
Yeah, I think if I break language down into, it is rhythm and melody. The rhythm part, that's beat keeping. The melody part is singing. So, but it's not just singing along to something. It's not just singing whatever you want. It's singing with a purpose. And that, from a musical point of view, is working with kids to sing in tune. And that's just the ability to sing something and they sing it back to you exactly the same. It is a monumentally difficult task for the brain to do. And that's why a lot of people go, I can't sing. It's like, no, everyone can sing. It's just you might not, or you might have forgotten how to sing in tune, because singing in tune is a trained, learned skill. And if the closer kids can get to singing in tune, the closer they can get to transferring that across into their language. They can hear the subtleness of different consonant sounds. They can hear, it even adds on to, they can hear, they get better at their syntax or their grammar, because a lot of music learning activities come from changing words around, putting words in different places, slightly different melodies, noticing where the novel sound is, the new sound, which translates across to where's the new novel word and how do I put it into this sentence. So there's all these connections across that don't seem obvious to start with, but they are really, really closely related in our brains. And I think that the more we can look at this science and go, okay, how can we work with the kids' brains to just build those really strong foundations, the better we will be. So that's the exciting part for me, is how can this research transfer across to the classroom? And it seems to be as simple as a little bit of beat keeping, a little bit of melody every single day, and working with the kids to do that to a really high level.
Are there particular, say, children's books or texts that you would use as a sort of a rhythmic music adjacent lesson? Do you have favorites that you go to, like poetry or rhyme?
You know what I'm fascinated, I'm going to switch that around ever so slightly. I love talking to Kindy 1 and 2 teachers, actually all the way through, and saying which are the books that you work with that to you sound a bit like music in language. And I got the idea originally from, I remember when I was very young, I was with Mum and we went to a lecture by Mem Fox, and she talked about how carefully she constructs her language in terms of its rhythm and melody, and it's how it sits perfectly together. And what I like doing is actually going to the teachers, because when I do, they all can list maybe 3 or 4 that are perfect for that. And you know, books change with time and favorites, but I actually think teachers can identify the ones that kind of just seem to roll off the tongue. They seem to be easy to say, and also the kids are able to repeat them easily, and that's the indication of which ones they are. And I think having that broad definition helps us choose the right books for the right contexts as well, wherever we are in whatever state, regional, metropolitan, what are the different cultures within the school. We can pick those things out.
Everyone who's on the webinar now, if you'd like to share the books that just jumped into your head, because I bet you all had about 2 or 3, Maybe we can build a bit of a list in the chat box and get some ideas going.
That's a great idea.
Nice. Yeah. But I'm not seeing any come in, so maybe you would like to start them off.
Oh, yeah, there's wombat stew. Yes. I love wombat stew.
That is such a good one.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Vera who asks, how is a beat keeping activity set up? How do you start it up? Do you set the rhythm and children copy?
Yeah, okay. So definitions of beat keeping. Beat is a continuous, doesn't stop, always stays the same. That's what we do when we tap along to music with our foot, and it doesn't change at all. If we break that apart, what's really interesting about it is it's really important. Sorry, my phone just started ringing. How distracting. It's really, really important to if we break it apart, that's hard. We have to know how far our hands have to go out, how far they have to come back in, how fast we're actually going. So usually, I do this with teachers as well, is just to go, okay, I'm going to count 4 in a certain beat, and you're just going to clap after me. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Just keeping that together, and we're going to have a certain amount of time that we keep it for, and then we're going to stop together. It's as simple as that. And then you could go, let's count in 1, 2, 3, 4. And stop. Something like that. Just changing up like that is a really fantastic way to get the brain going. Now, rhythm is same thing, do it with the hands, but it's long and short sounds, so it varies. So this is a beat, this is a rhythm. So that has long and short sounds to it. Often I will do lots of call and response with the students. I won't even say anything. I will just put my hand up and I'll do a rhythm and they'll just clap it straight back to me. And then I'll do another rhythm as long as I stay in time. And what that means is underneath here, I'm feeling a pulse that just keeps going like a metronome. If anyone's had a metronome when they've learned an instrument, it's just like that. So it's very, very, you can call and response is a really great way to do it. As the kids get more confident and to move it to that next level, it's great to get the students to provide the rhythm. Very taxing on the brain, so don't jump into that too soon. So I might go, the kids will go, da, 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 and then little student next to me might go, and then we'll go, da, 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 and the next one will go, but we're always keeping a beat going along the way. It's really, really simple. It very, very quickly focuses all the students because they have to listen so well to what's coming next and when their turn is. And they also have to deal with, there's this funny thing that happens, we adults do it too. When it becomes your turn, some people just get really nervous and can't think. So I always have a point where I say, if your brain has a buzzy moment, then I just want you to go back to clapping 4 beats, and that's okay, we'll just repeat after you. And it allows those kids who struggle a little bit with that moment in an emotional sense to have an out, to have an option as well. And it's as simple as that. Is that a starting point?
It's a great starting point, I think.
Good.
If anyone has any further questions or need some clarifications, they can drop it into the comments.
I'm loving these suggestions on the books. They're great.
Aren't they so good? I'm going to pull them all together in a list for everyone. They know. Of course they know. I'm not a teacher. I don't know. But they know. I have this great comment here from John Callow who says that there's some fascinating insights about your work here. And do you think in one sense we are rediscovering much of the received wisdom of the past, the vital importance of arts and music in our classrooms, which nourishes young learners and, as your work shows, also cross-pollinates to reading?
Yeah, that's again, I keep going, and I have it with teachers who have maybe been teaching, say, for 30 years, 35 years, and they go, we used to do this. And it's like, yes. And it's kind of interesting that we've lost it. It's kind of fallen off somewhere about including and understanding music as part of language learning. But then I look at a lot of the programs that we're using all around Australia. Jolly Phonics is a perfect example. And it's just filled with musical elements. So it's kind of like we can go, I'm not saying this is a new way of doing something. I'm saying that we now have the scientific research to understand why it worked so well. So how do we reintegrate it back again? And in some cases, the one thing that's different now is for our students, the world is noisier than it's ever been before. There is so much environmental noise, but our brain wasn't built for that. So our students are having to process that a lot more than we ever had to at school and in our lives. And for that very reason, their auditory processing is doing two things. One, it's getting into auditory overload far more quickly. And that'll exhibit itself in all sorts of ways. Kids will stop being able to pay attention because there's so much going on in their ears, and they're expending a huge amount of energy to process that sound, and they can't stop that happening. The brain does it on its own. And some other things that they do, they can behave in a particular kind of way because they're getting distracted. They can kind of go off on their own world because, again, they're getting this overload. We see it very clearly with kids that have autism as well, that they really struggle with sound and processing. So we need to have that. And for that very reason, their auditory processing needs to be at the highest level that we can get it to, so that they can learn language and improve their literacy skills. So it's an important time to have this research to take those important steps for our students and enhance our literacy teaching.
Absolutely. Tanya has said, would you be able to share some of the best research, or where can teachers access the good ones in particular?
Yeah, okay. The access is a really interesting issue. So, and it's actually the work that I do. There is an online site called Bigger, Better Brains, which was the name of my thesis. And it's specifically there for teachers for us to take the research and put it into all sorts of things: online courses, posters, videos. We do professional readings. There's like fact cards, quotable research you can share. But we handpick it for you because it is so hard to access, A, the full papers, and B, just understanding them is really, really hard. But I love doing it. I love translating it down so that teachers can actually use it. So Bigger, Better Brains is where I do that, and that's that work for teachers. There's a lot of information shared through the news and social media. Like a lot of things, it kind of can be dumbed down a little bit too much, I feel. But it does give you the highlights of what favourite research is the beat research. But also, I think one of my, I don't know, we're talking about literacy, but my favourite area of development for music learning is executive function, which comes into language learning anyway. And it's all those being able to pay attention, to focus, to make decisions, come up with a strategy, come up with a plan. To me, I call them grown-up skills. And they're all the skills we're working for the whole time we have kids at school to develop them so they can go out into the big wide world. And they're the skills that we now understand that music learning improves, and they're the skills that then go on to help with academic achievement. So that's a really, really important area for me as well. So yeah, there's a lot out there, and we're trying to curate it in a way that is really, really good for teachers, not just in Australia, but all around the world.
We have a question from someone else. Never mind my question. Robin asks, how would you start with older children from language deprived backgrounds?
Robin, what do you mean by language deprived? How would you define that? Because I have a few definitions in my head. Will she write back?
She will write back. I'm sure she will.
Talk anyway. Funnily enough, music learning is sequential, and it doesn't matter how old you are, it starts in the same place. So I could do a beat keeping activity with kindy kids, and I can do them with 5th graders, and I can do them with year 11 students, and it still has the same impact, and it's still just as difficult. And so it's important. It's almost like I just phrase it differently. It's just a bit more of a challenge. One of my favourite things I used to do with year 5 students and then year 6 students, for some reason I had the lesson before lunch a lot of the time with them. So I used to say, the bell's about to go out to lunch. Can everyone line up in a long line from the door? And I have one challenge for you. And the challenge was I set them a beat, and I said each person has to clap all the way down in time, And when the whole team gets it, we can all go out to lunch. And of course, you can imagine year 5, year 6, oh, we can do that. That's easy. No, they can't. It's really, really hard. And of course, the same thing happens every time about kid number 5, number 6, not listening, not paying attention, it falls over. And the thing is, they've got to go back to the beginning. They have to do it as a team. And the number of times the bell's gone and students, they've all gone, no, we're not going out, we're going to get this. And it becomes a challenge for them to actually do. Again, creates social cohesion, creates teamwork, creates a shared goal, all of these things that we love doing with students.
I think that probably answered her question. Oh, she just came back to us too. So we've got children who have not had strong early language skills prior to commencing in the first years of school, or for any reason, for any number of reasons. So I think
I find it most powerful that through this research, we've started to understand that song is actually our first language. So children sing before they speak, which any parent would have heard, and we understand as well. But when they haven't had strong language backgrounds, they struggle to get from the song to the speech part. And what music helps to do is separate out what is singing and what is speech. I also find, and this is probably the most powerful thing, particularly in schools that are in really challenging circumstances, the students have poor enunciation. Now, as a researcher said to me, if a child can't hear the language sound, they can't speak it. If they can't speak it, they can't read it. And I love that. I like simple, and I like, yes, of course. So music learning helps them hear it. Now, I know that it's not hearing as in the sound goes in, it's hearing the difference between a b, a d, and a g. So it's hearing that really slight difference. So if we start with the hearing, which is where all language starts, music learning can help those skills, that auditory processing skill, which then takes them on to speaking it. So saying the difference between b, d, g, and then reading the difference between them. So it connects in that kind of way.
Would you change any of that advice for students who are learning English as an additional language, or would you add anything?
No, they've done a lot of research with bilingual musicians because they go, well, isn't it all the same stuff? And the answer is absolutely it is. The overlapping network is more, it's not bigger, the network is faster, more synchronized, more connected, just like a better machine. And so they've done a lot of that research. So all they're doing is using exactly the same network. And if anything, music learning just helps with the primary language or the first language, and then the second language, whatever that might be as well. So whether it's English and then they learn Spanish, or whether it's Indonesian and then they learn English, music learning is kind of the intermediary for all of that, because it's creating the foundation of all language learning.
Would that then make you want to recommend sort of a more musical approach in English and literacy classes for that have a significant number of EALD students? Yeah,
and I've seen it work really, really well, particularly with those students who might come in. It has incredible effects with kids who come in with a poor language, but then may come in with trauma as well. So a lot of our refugee children. It helps them integrate into the social part of the class as well, because that music making is inherently social, as well as improving their language skills as well. So I think the part of it is not to just do music and then do language, it's to understand how both complement each other. And that's how I view it. Music and language learning should be complementary learning activities.
I think you were making that a point beautifully throughout this webinar, so thank you for that. Jody says that quality universal preschool education seems more important than ever in the light of this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's the 3 to 5 age group, which we know from a learning perspective is absolutely vital. We now even know for our auditory processing, that's when it's developing rapidly during that time. So yeah, I'm interested in not segregating it into certain age groups, like this is when we should do this, because it's a continuum and it should start at birth. And I think there should be education for parents about, and I'm hoping this book will help, about when music is sitting for every child's development, and then it should transfer into preschool, and then should transfer into particularly the junior years of primary school, but it has impacts all the way.
Absolutely. Robin has said so beautifully, when teaching children from different backgrounds, music is often their common language.
Yes, absolutely.
It's lovely. If anyone has any other questions that they would like to ask Anita, I would recommend that you ask them now, because we're almost out of time. It just flew by.
Yeah, that's quick.
It was, wasn't it?
I can talk for ages about this, because this is a connection I love.
Do you have a particular favourite story that you haven't been able to break out yet today that you'd like to share while we're getting some last questions in?
Just my own story, which is one where I am a firstborn child of a reading recovery and remedial reading teacher, and I couldn't read. I could pretend to read. I was really good. You would all know those students who are like pretending and they're picking up signals. They're very good at it. I was really, really struggling, and you can imagine the tension at home when my mum could not help me. I might have been a bit stubborn too. But yeah, I really struggled, and I was given my clarinet at I was 9 years of age, but more importantly, I learned how to read music. So reading music is a symbol to sound system, which means you read a symbol, you hear the sound in your head, you tell your body how to make that sound, and then the sound goes straight back into your ear and you double check. It's exactly the same process with language reading, and we hear it with kids when they first start reading, which is the T and say a T and an H. They see it, they hear the sound in their head, they tell their body how to make the sound, and then they check in their ear that it's gone back in. And about 6 months after I started learning to read music, I found it a lot easier to learn to read language. So what fascinates me, and I think is my ultimate question in the world, is did learning music change the course of my life? Because I would have had a very, very different journey if I remained a struggling reader all the way through. So that's where all this is coming from.
That is such a fascinating question that I think is going to prompt a lot of people to consider how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
What helped them get there? That's fantastic. We just have a question here for the name of your book and where you can get it. So please give us a plug.
The name of the book is The Music Advantage. Comes from a part of the research, which is figure out what the musician advantage is. And what might be involved, and you can get it just about everywhere. I know it's in Dimmicks. I know that it's online. I know you can get it through my website as well. And if you have a principal or a family member or someone that you'd like to get a signed copy for, I think it's really important to give this as a present, as something that you can read. So yeah, my website is anitacollinsmusic.com, and you can buy your signed copy there, and I will sign it for you and write a little message. Yeah, so it's just about everywhere. And for those who have friends maybe overseas, it's about to be released in the US, and it's going to go into lots of other countries as well. So it's very exciting to have that happen, but I'm really excited that I can showcase so many Australian education stories all around the world.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. I will drop the link to your website and to Bigger, Better Brains. Is that what it's called? Yes, in our email when we send out the recording to everyone. Great. So they'll have it all to their fingertips. I think we are bang on 4:15, which is pretty incredible. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this with us. I think we've all just had a really fascinating 45 minutes. I really appreciate your insights and if you're taking the time to share it with us and our members. Thank you very much. I really like English teachers and teachers of English are very much, and primary teachers are very much where I started my educational journey with my mum. So I have, it's an enormous privilege to be able to talk to you, and thank you for all the work that you do with all of the Australian students you teach. Thank you so much. I think that was such a nice thing to say. Again, I'm not a teacher, but I'm accepting that compliment on their behalf. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I will send through the recording as soon as I've got it uploaded. So hopefully within the hour, we'll have all those links out to you. Just before you all head off, I'll just tell you really quickly about our next PETA member webinar on the 21st of October. That's a Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. So the same time, but it will be daylight savings time. So I'll let you all work out the maths on that. That will be with Peter O'Brien. He will be talking about his experience teaching in a bush school in the 60s when he was 2 trains and a mail car out of Armidale, and he was 20, fresh out of teaching school, and he had this group of students from 5 to 15 and sort of went, what do I do now? So we're going to learn what he did. So please join us then, and thank you for joining us now, and thank you again, Anita, for your brilliant insights. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you guys, and we'll catch up with you soon. Bye.